Welcome to the Bryden Wood Podcast. Bryden Wood is a global strategy and design consultancy. We are inventive thinkers, designers, engineers, and technical experts. We integrate creativity and deep experience to resolve complex challenges and realize a better world. Find us at brydenwood.com.
Okay, so we're going to kick off by talking about the very recent power outages in Spain and Portugal, and what that tells us about the grid and the reliability of energy supplies and the implications to the developing energy market. So, Martin, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, of course, we don't know that much yet. So there's only some stripping through of some of the reasons for it. But what it does highlight is how little we know, and the big concern is how much does anybody else know. So is there any great mastermind behind the global grid systems, or is in fact the grid system become quite a chaotic system, or is it in fact a well understood system? We don't know that, and some of that's kind of coming through now because we're learning that what we all thought was probably a cyber attack. That was kind of my initial thought. I guess it must have been many people's initial thought. Actually seems to be, if we believe what we hear again, that it's something to do with the lack of inertia in the system, which is coming from the fact that we've got so many more renewables in the grid, particularly in Spain, obviously, which is heavily solar. And that's that lack of inertia, which kind of really means spinning things. It really is like inertia like that, because it's kind of like the turbines that spin in gas turbine or a steam turbine, and they actually create that kind of inertia, in other words, the stored energy that allow people to get through these kind of incidents. One thing I thought was actually quite impressive is how the grid came back on. So therefore that does give you some confidence in the underlying knowledge of the speed and pace which was put back in place. But obviously it's super fundamental as to why it went down in the first place and what it tells us.
I guess grids were started off being quite simple things when they were first created.
Yeah, I think the first thing is that it just shows how reliant we are now on electricity in a way that we weren't 20, 30 years ago. For transport, communications, hospitals, electricity is so vital to life now in our society. And as electrification continues, it's going to that's going to intensify. So it's a bit of a wake-up call, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess so. But then, absolutely. But that's one of the things that that sort of brings to light is like how much do we actually rely completely on the grid? Do we have 100% reliance on the grid? Or we don't, obviously, at the moment, because we have other systems and other power systems that are outside the grid. But the question is, what is the proportionality of on-grid and off-grid, and how diversified should that be, and how centralised that should that be? That's a sort of debate. And whilst it's not totally no one's totally in control of that debate, you certainly should try to lead the debate on that. So how many of the big energy sources that are growing with some of the new technologies, for example, AI data centers, you've got great demand. Some of these AI data centers are looking to absorb, gigawatt power.
Which is a large town.
Which is it's crazy, and we're involved in this deployment and technology, and that's kind of one of the reasons that we're so fascinated by the power sources. Is that actually a lot of the industries that we're working in are actually increasing the demand for power, increasing the demand for reliable power, and they're doing so for, generally speaking, good reasons. But the question is, what effect are they going to have on the existing infrastructure? And also, the problem, generally speaking, is that the way that we've allowed things to evolve historically is by the demand of the marketplace, and by some forms of this mixture of market and central planning when it comes to power distribution. But the speed of pace of change and the speed of increased demand for energy is just sort of that word unprecedented, and it is unprecedented, and it's happening in so many multiple industries where the demand. I mean, just look at the electrification of cars. and
Mm.
electrification of cars, suddenly massive extra demand of
Like
power.
one in 5
data
cars in the
centers.
world now apparently are electric, which is
And
you know,
this opens up, opportunities as well as threats, of course. And every car is a potential energy storage system, and there's been a lot of talk about utilising that. And I think there are some schemes available now where you can plug a car into the grid and that storage can be used. But as demand is added to the grid and supply is added to the grid, the how is that process managed, if that's even the right word? Who understands how the system is changing? It's a huge challenge, isn't it?
Well, I guess one of the things we all want to know as the general public is this system reaching a point of chaos effectively, or is it in fact a managed, understood, and carefully modelled system? I think neither of those are true. It's somewhere in between. But somewhere in between, understanding the somewhere in between is pretty important. One of the main reasons for me is it's so important, apart from keeping the lights on, which is clear. Is that if you're ever going to invest and you're going to decarbonise the grid in the right manner and at the quickest possible pace, and the pace, by the way, is something we just can't leave to market forces in a typical way. We just can't do that. It's never going to be quick enough. Absolutely never going to be quick enough. If we're going to do that, then we need to get some better sense of how to understand and model the grid, and better sense of how much power we want to actually put on the grid and we want to leave locally. So do we service these high demands without using the grid? We've got to understand the grid profiling. We've got to understand how much we can actually flatten profiling out of the grid. And then we've got to really understand the different energy sources and their different characteristics as what we call network value. So it's absolutely no point understanding the strike rate of a particular energy source. So, for example, famously, wind power effectively dropped, particularly offshore, dropped in cost enormously. I think it went to strike at £57, and that really spurred that industry on, and we see the massive advance of that. And see, fantastic, but of course we all know it's got one of the worst profiles when it comes to the generation of power, because when the wind blows. So you've got this cheap energy, and then it's suddenly that's becoming kind of like what the market's expecting, and you're going, yes, I know, but what value is something that can turn off and ramp up and ramp down, such as combined cycle gas turbine plant? That obviously got the most flexible at the moment, as far as I understand it. It's pretty well the most flexible power source, though. Therefore, it has a significantly higher. But the problem is, it's not decarbonised, and actually carbon capture, and that's very difficult because the flue gases are very dilute CO2. So,
I mean, it is an established technology. It just happens to be expensive. So it brings back to that question: what does expensive mean?
Well, expensive is network value in a sense.
Yeah.
So, and if we don't get network value, sorry to rant on this one, but if we don't get network value sorted as an understood, at least as a nation, although this is actually, of course, doesn't actually confine itself to national boundaries because of all the interconnects there are between different countries and states, and there should be, of course, because of load balancing. But we got to get the investment in different technologies correctly. We've got to understand where to invest and how to invest and to what degree to invest. And we do that by getting a better understanding of network value, not absolute cost of energy.
And what are the key measures of network value, do we think? I mean, there's clearly price points, the one that's always talked about.
What do we mean by network value? Can we define it better?
Yeah, well, we can have a go. It's tricky.
Yeah.
It's easy to say.
Well,
easy to say, difficult to define.
As you think about it, actually, more factors come into play. But
well, yeah, exactly. Because you start. I mean, you can start with some simple things like, can it ramp up and can it ramp down to demand? So that can it follow demand profile? That's got to be one absolute huge one in terms of network value. The other things is, what's its reliability to balance against. So I'll use some examples. Nuclear gives you a very good, consistent, but it's overly consistent. It's totally flat.
It doesn't.
So it gives you power when it doesn't go down.
Yeah.
But of course, it's fantastic at filling the gaps in when you've got peaky, and we do get, unfortunately, particularly in the UK. I don't know how much we should talk specifically about the UK in this, actually, because of course this
I guess
it's COVID.
just about every country will have very peaky demands because of usually the day has a flow to it, and
Yeah, but I suppose at least in areas where, for example, there's a great deal of solar availability, like the Arab regions, or
well, I guess inconsistent weather patterns, whereas we have inconsistent.
we do, and we get those sort of becalming periods
Yeah.
where we neither get wind or we get sun for. I think there was a last year or the year before, I can't remember. There was a specific period when we had about 2 or 3 months of very low sustainable energy generation because the wind was low.
Yeah.
And we had low summer. So I think November sort of period, October, November period. And how do we overcome those? So that brings us on to there's a little bit of competition, perhaps there should be. There's this competition between storage and the concept that storage, and that's derives quite a lot from the nuclear debate, because people who don't particularly want to see the mass introduction, or sorry, the significantly increased introduction of new nuclear power.
Yeah.
I call it new nuclear. We can get onto that in a minute, but the new nuclear power are looking to say, well, actually, just up and up and up of your sustainable sources, and then just store.
Yeah.
Energy storage. I'm a bit of an energy storage skeptic, but I perhaps don't have enough knowledge to be that skeptical. But generally speaking, the efficiencies of the reclaim of that power are quite low, and the scale of it's just incredible.
Yeah.
You've got to wonder whether the scale and effort that goes into building those, and the time it takes to build those storage systems, unless it's battery, and of course then you've got all the sort of rare earths and all this kind of other problem of the rare earth metals you need in them and so on, lithium and whatever, is that the time spent on that, would it be better spent on actually putting into just some fundamental energy producing systems in the first place, be they sustainable or be they nuclear or whatever else?
Well, that does take us on to the question of distributed versus centralised power generation and storage, because storage, it just might look more appealing if it's much more distributed, and
which comes back to your point about car batteries, because car batteries, you could argue, is a hugely distributed storage system.
And it raises a question of who owns, or and I mean that in a sort of broad sense, the energy system, a particular subset of the energy grid. So we keep talking about the grid. What is the grid? We're connected to the in the UK, we're connected to the European grid. Portugal's connected to Spain. So the US grid is quite different in its characteristics, I understand, to the UK grid, not as integrated. So I guess we have to think about what we mean when we talk about grid. Where do we draw our boundaries?
Well,
and how do you? I suppose it's because where you draw the boundary very much drives the way you analyse and then come up with solutions within
it does.
that boundary.
And it does bring in some political preferences, quite frankly.
Yeah, definitely.
The political preferences, and one of the things is there's a sort of interesting question between political preferences and resilience. So, does off-grid distributed energy generation and storage give you more resilience or less resilience? It's an interesting question, that, because it's back to
the question also is resilience
resilience.
So is it resilience
It gives some people more,
Yeah,
and other things less, doesn't it? So
I'm on the Evesham grid. I'm not sending my electricity at Persham.
yeah, right. I mean, but on the other hand, there's a lot of there's a huge common sense, for example, in interconnecting different nation states with energy. So that's politically problematic in some instances, but I mean, it's fantastic for reducing demand. I mean, for example, it's pretty obvious, but if you the more east-west interconnection you make, the more you can overcome day-night. The obvious day-night power problem. I mean, in the US that actually happens. So there is actually a distribution system, backbone system to some degree, that has an east-west influence in terms of load spreading. But because the US is obviously quite federal state driven, that's not how the networks, I understand, quite are done. But there's quite a divided network. Maybe it's not as strong as it needs to be, perhaps. But that's an obvious way of distributing loads. that's a fantastic thing, but then that's a central system. So are you sort of pro the central system? So certain things politically say, well, I feel that's a fantastic European, for example, pan-European initiative. On one hand, and on the other hand, I'm going, bloody hell, that's feeding away power.
Well, of course, that's a lot has been driven by individual country power security as it started to drive people the other way and looking very insular about controlling their own power.
Well, yeah. Well, on that insular thing, I mean, I think there is a political imperative. I think is the sort of relationship between big commerce and state, in the sense that I think it's fair enough to say that some of these big commercial entities that are now looking to consume vast amounts of power, why are they looking to consume power? Well, it's in some regards it's an essential service. So but in terms of, say, for example, the provision of data centers, but in another way, it's just naked commercialism to attract as much of the market as possible. So they have a responsibility not to skew the grid. They may be able to afford. I mean, one of the things we see them is them buying green energy packages that are so large that it starves everyone else of the availability of the green energy. So you go, well, that isn't a way to decarbonise, and then they will put out vast amounts of advertising saying that they're the greenest provider of this particular thing, but only because they're the biggest financial buyer in this marketplace, and therefore they can skew the market.
Have we seen that in Ireland? I think there's been central government pushback against the development of data centres for precisely that reason.
Well, yes, and of course one of the things is that it's I mean, one of the things about data centres, everybody knows a chunk of the energy is lost in the cooling, and of course there's been an attempt to turn them into district heating schemes and these kind of things, but this kind of integration. One of the things, and it goes for all of this power integration, is that it's just incredibly slow.
Yeah.
So there's going to have to be quite a lot of effort put in. I mean, sort of distributed systems have to exist because of speed, because centralised systems. I mean, another classic case, again, no expert, but we know that most of the wind energy production for Germany is in the north, and most of the commerce and industries in the south, and their grid system isn't currently efficiently transferring from the north to the south. Now, do we expect that grid system to change rapidly? No, we don't. So is the answer therefore to get more sustainable energy production sources? I don't want to speak for Germany here, but is it to get more sustainable point of view sources down in the south of Germany? And you've got to think that form of distributed energy production has to be here. And I guess that's one of the reasons why people have got quite excited about small modular reactor so-called SMRs, because they suddenly think, hang on a minute, it's decarbonised, it's small. Apparently we're going to be able to build them really quickly, which we maybe get onto later. And we can take out these point source loads, and we can basically make these, particularly these big commercial entities, clean up their own act effectively.
Yeah.
They don't,
Well, it's another dimension, isn't it? Is the hard to decarbonise sectors tend to be very high energy users and things which are quite difficult to move, like steelworks. So, to think that they're going to decarbonise by taking grid power, in light of the conversation we're having, seems quite unlikely.
Well, the grid just won't adapt quickly enough to distribute green power from where it's generated to where it's demanded.
And I think the way when there's supply pressure on the grid at the moment, then domestic users get priority in the UK at least. So you don't want to be switching.
I'm not sure that's globally the case.
Probably not.
Well,
Certainly.
I mean, one of the things about it is, I mean, most of those, so a lot of those hard to decarbonise areas are either going to derive their fuels from bio sources in the first place, gasification or whatever, or other forms familiar with, or they're going to use hydrolysis, which is going to use a huge amount of power, then that's obviously got to be green energy. So I think some people thought for a period that there was a bit of a silver bullet in the idea of using sustainable when it was peaking in its production and wasn't being used, and then turning it into hydrogen through hydrolysis. But the problem with that is the hydrolysis equipment's incredibly expensive, and you're amortizing the cost of the equipment against period that it's used.
Yeah.
If it's only used in points of,
Yeah.
it's fantastic because you get the energy use
Yeah.
from the, and you store it effectively in the hydrogen, but it's only happening from
Hydrogen. Yeah.
who's going to invest in that kind of equipment that's only going to get a sort of 15-20% usage.
Well, unless you set a different
So
value for different,
exactly,
for
which goes back to that
you
point.
represent the network value for the power source.
I'm bound to say that's another place where actually another way, instead of thinking of small modular or thinking of new nuclear more particularly as being needed to be distributed in points, actually doing things like, for example, hydrogen production for some of them harder to decarbonize, because I think that's where I think we all agree that that's where that's going to be needed. It's not going to be. I think the old concept, one of the concepts of the hydrogen economy, where everything was run on hydrogen. The classic being everyone's home just having a domestic boilers running on hydrogen. I think that's pretty well disappeared.
I certainly hope so.
Because everyone realised, I think the head of Octopus Energy, I think it was, said, it's akin to flushing the toilet with champagne. Which I thought was, obviously he was biased when he said that in the first place, but it was a nice.
It was a good one of those good statements, which gets everyone thinking in the.
It does. I think that's just sort of gone. It wasn't that long ago. I think it was still being mooted 2 or 3 or 4 years ago.
The debate continues to rage, and I think the hydrogen debate is quite a good example of how different technologies are touted, I suppose might be a word, or promoted by specific commercial interests. And is this really the best way of trying to work out how we should arrange this very complex system? I'm not sure what the alternatives are, but it seems to me that do I create hydrogen using electrolysis and then feed that into my plant, or do I use methane and capture the CO2 to use the medium of, I've got a great technology, invest in this? Seems quite an indirect way of addressing the problem.
Well, it comes back to that. If we had an agreed view of what network value was, then you would go, how does this technology fit? How does it fit into the system?
Yes.
I think
what's its price point?
So
how sustainable?
It's exactly the problem. You've got to have. There has to be this in this kind of emerging new technologies. There has to be a kind of startup mentality where you're producing a new technology, or you're forwarding that new technology. You've got to tell everyone it's the best thing ever, because that's what you've got to do.
And
therefore,
the danger is you might succeed.
Well, you might succeed in that. And therefore, there needs to be some method of contextualizing those claims. That's the point. Is there's nothing wrong with a claim that I can do this thing and I can produce a biofuel or whatever, and I can do it at a lower rate than anyone else. But the point is, the claim has to be contextualized somehow. So there needs to be something, and this is where we come to this sort of like business of how much is this done at a sort of nation state level, and how much is this done at a market investment level. Is someone has to be orchestrating somehow, or there has to be some level of orchestration. This is one of the real worries. Is this is very complicated. There's many people who could contribute to this conversation. One of the reasons we doing this podcast, because people should feel free. But it should be. There's many people that could be contributing hugely to this kind of debate. The question is, where is that knowledge being collected, and where is it being channeled? So, I mean, I sat in a chamber in the House of Lords, not the main one, but some side room somewhere, having a debate about small modular reactor introduction into the UK, and there was a group of lords in the room who just kept saying, "How much is it going to cost? What's the strike rate? Tell us the strike rate, because we're going to go into the chamber, and we like the idea of the technology. We think we're advocates of it. We just like to see how it is, and and therefore basically claim that it's low cost, or is the fundamental." And everyone who else was in the room kept saying, but it depends on how you view the cost of it. What's the network? And unfortunately, that was an illustration that this debate, which is being, in our own parliament, is not being had at anything like a sophisticated enough level. No, I'm not saying that was I don't know, 18 months ago, so it wasn't a lifetime ago. I doubt the debate has advanced massively. and it needs to advance massively. There's no point pretending something as complex as this is simple and
No.
reducing it, because it won't get you any further. It won't get us
It
anywhere.
never is it? If you pretend that something's easy when it's not, then you just start making the wrong decisions very quickly. Yeah.
So that if you like, framing of the marketplace is insufficient at the moment, isn't
Yeah.
it? And it's very difficult for investors. Let's say in data centers, because you can look at your problem in the context of the power for that data center, but when you look at it globally, that's not necessarily the best investment of the best investment in energy production when you look at a broader societal need.
No, and I mean, and even worse for potential technologies in actual power production. I mean, how does anybody know what how do they know they fit in? What do they expect to see as a how on earth do they gauge what the value of their product is at this point in time?
Yeah, because there's no guidance really, is there?
No, so there is
there's no shared view.
And I mean, that's the. I mean, I think that's one of the keenest areas that's felt is that the white. Well, it depends. It's an interesting one, isn't it? The new nuclear debate is a big one, and it's it's hard to avoid. It's hard to avoid this point, because we kind of understand wind production. We understand that it's getting a bit harder, as it's some of the best possible sites, easiest possible sites have been taken, and they get a little bit more difficult. But we sort of can get our heads around that. We can sort of get our heads around solar, although I find some of the solar locations in the UK and the ability for them to be blocked by local politics quite interesting. You could argue it's the UK struggles with that or benefits from that. Depends how you look at it. Local power in that sense, but the one of the things I think it's quite clear, and it's interesting. Obviously, Tony Blair came out and said it the other day, and you can see that it's seen as a criticism of current government policy, and you find it's Starmer trying to suggest that they're in fact exactly on the same page. But really, all it is what a previous Prime Minister can say compared to what a current Prime Minister can say. In actual fact, there is a pretty unification of understanding, and that's just one can say it and one can't, which is Blair's completely right. Got no chance at the moment on current trajectories. Any of the ambitious targets made for restriction of increase of warming of the globe are just completely, and the phasing out of fossil fuel are absolutely nowhere near at the moment. I mean, I think until you sort of accept that and stop kidding yourself, then you won't take this this debate won't go forward at the speed it needs to go forward at, because it really does need to go speed. The silver bullet some people see, and it's very controversial because some people see the proliferation of nuclear power as being a terrible thing. Some people seeing it as being an essential thing and something that should be welcomed, and that's a debate that's going to carry on. But the essential thing is that behind every new technology there is a set of value drivers that in this case are set at a society level. I mean, normally they'll be set at a sort of commercial level or a company level. These are set at a society level. So one of these questions I could say is, how safe do you want nuclear power to be? Well, I mean, what a question, because everyone's going to go totally safe. Or so totally safe, for example, has driven some of the new nuclear providers to head for reactors that, quite frankly, just decay heat, the way they cool down in the event of a serious problem, is they're just passively cool. Which, and it's a lovely concept, but of course it's very limiting in terms of they become less economical to build, less economical to run in certain instances. Got to be careful here, because there's all sorts of different providers will claim all sorts of different things about their new technology, but fundamentally it's not going to produce the most economical nuclear power. So then that means you've got to rely on systems, and then people say, well, as soon as they rely on systems, well, then failure has got a chance of occurring.
It's interesting.
It doesn't rely on
in the airline industry. They have set. I mean, they haven't set zero limits. Well, they set themselves very low limits of death and injury, and accept
but
it
they
as
still
an
have,
industry.
but they still have to accept a plane will fall out of the sky.
Now and again.
I mean, I've in my exposure to the work we've done on new nuclear, if that's the terminology, is and people tend to focus on the reactor technology and not the full fuel cycle. And really the bits that are, you know, more worrying are the bits that are not at the power generation point, the storage and production and disposal of fuel. So I think when you again you look at technology selection, you've got to look at all that.
And that's another network value, isn't it? Because
Well,
it's
again,
not just about the value in the moment. It's about how do you create that?
yeah.
What does it leave
Well,
behind? The legacy and all those sorts of
I
things.
mean, that's one of the things. I mean, first thing is to say, actually, we talk about SMR, small modular reactors. The first thing is people don't think generally understand is really what that should refer to is the size of the reactor itself, and the whole concept that you should be able to produce the reactor off-site in a factory and then bring the reactor to the site, thus saving a huge amount of the work and effort and increasing the quality and so on of the reactor. That's a good aspiration, but that doesn't mean that you have to have lots of small nuclear power stations. That just means the reactor's small. So one of the big questions here, is it a good idea to actually say, suddenly going right back to the beginning of our conversations in some way, I'll tell you what, we'll distribute power from a green source by having all these small modular reactors. And I think this was generally the concept people had in their heads, is they'll be scattered around the place. But my real question with that is, yes, okay, but fundamentally, you know that's not going to be as economical per kilowatt hour when it comes down to it, because you're going to be building loads of different power stations as opposed to a single one. So that's a problem in the first case. And second about that is, think about just the regulation and the planning and the approvals and the environmental and the neighbouring issues and all the things, the planning issues.
Which might well be 90% of the cost or time.
Exactly. With the many distributed places. In fact, what you should think of is, again, go back to what it says, which is the small modular reactor. It's only the reactor we're referring to in that, and therefore you could group 30 reactors. Most of the ones that are going forward now in the US are using multiple reactors on a single site, but tendencies 2, 3, 4, 5. Actually, they're not odd numbers, but anyway, 2s and 4s, 6s in a site. But I mean, there's no real limit to that. So you can make up your traditional scale power station of 3 gigawatts, or I mean, Hinkley's 3.5, I think it is, gigawatts, with small modular reactors if you wanted to. So it's a different way of looking at it and consolidating them, but using them at a small scale for the build. So we don't know what exact balancing factor, but firstly, it's a bit of a misnomer, small modular reactor, not for the reactor, but for the power station size of it. And secondly, the question is, well, which ones of the technologies are going to be acceptable going forward? And from a safety versus cost of energy point of view, because the trouble is, if you offer nuclear, people say, I just want 100% safety, and you go, well, that has a certain cost associated with it, rather than 99.999% safety. And the other thing is, as you rightly pointed out earlier, traditionally, there's a traditional fuel provision, enrichment of uranium and so on, and type of production of fuel rods, and the way that they are reprocessed and stored. Do we fit into that industry, or do we create a whole new industry where actually a lot more of the work that's done in the nuclear power station currently is actually done off-site in super centres or places elsewhere and not in the central thing? But this is what, those kind of questions. Again, many more people could contribute to that debate, but that's a debate that needs to be understood, and we've got to stop having people saying it's okay, we'll put an SMR there. It's just not. That is just not the sophistication of the debate isn't high enough.
So I think, that's a general point, isn't it? Is that we need a much more sophisticated, layered debate about this, and not very simple. Small nuclear is going to do it, or hydrogen's good, or hydrogen's bad, or
no, absolutely. No. So I suppose the question is, how does that debate get stimulated?
Yeah.
Where does it get stimulated? Where does it get effectively and contained? Well, in what political construct is that debate to be had? Because the problem is, you could see it as being such an important subject. You could see it as being quite politically, influential.
Well, it is politically charged. Isn't it?
So, but is it done highly centrally? Is it done at an advisory level? What level of what purpose does the debate serve ultimately?
And I guess the question as well is, there's questions for businesses and who are producers, and there's questions for government, and and they might be
Yeah.
different questions.
And questions for businesses as
Yeah.
consumers as
Yeah,
well.
and
Because,
questions for consumers. Yeah.
looking at the decarbonisation of pharmaceutical industry, for instance, is that
Yeah.
that's a good example where um, a lot of companies are doing a great job in decarbonising, but they're doing it by buying green electricity off the grid, which is in short supply. So if you take it from there for pharmaceuticals, because they've got the sort of margins on their products and the sort of supply chain configuration that allows them to do that. Then that instead of perhaps reducing their demand, you've lost the opportunity to use that green power somewhere else.
Well, I think one of the first problems with that whole pharmaceutical base is I just don't think the general public realise quite what an impact pharmaceuticals have from a carbon perspective.
Yeah.
The carbon intensity of pharmaceuticals is sky high.
Yeah, it's
and
high.
well, my God, it's high.
Yeah.
And they don't. People just don't necessarily appreciate that. It's not an immediate thing they're associated with the packet of tablets they're consuming. It's so understanding the context of all of the carbon, the hard to decarbonise areas, along with the whole debate of distributed or centralised power systems and grids. Somehow we have to get this level of debate more sophisticated, and we have to find a centre or some sort of fulcrum for this conversation. And I'm seeing a huge amount of information, but I'm not seeing a huge amount of interaction and debate with the purpose of communicating understanding. Yeah.
I mean, it's just not there, is it? So yeah, to bring this to a close, I mean, I'm left. What's in my head? I'm left with trying to get some shape and understanding of how you work out how you distribute power, what's locally sourced and what's shared, and at what level do you share that between countries or localities, and that we need some rationality about that model, that evolving model. What are yours, Adrian?
I think the debate needs to move away from being a competition between technologies. So it doesn't make any sense to me that some people are pro wind, some people are pro nuclear, but if you look at the systems are complex, as we said, and you have to be able to pick the right combination for the right situation. So it's more about having that framework for making those decisions rather than arguing one technology versus another.
Well, from my perspective, just from a personal perspective, we are involved in designing and developing technologies that are all massively power hungry, and it's a bit like needing to do something about clean up your own mess. Really, it's one thing to produce a demand, and that demand's for all sorts of great reasons in terms of, say, pharmaceuticals, or hard to decarbonise, make sure we can keep flying effectively, and so on. All these things are a great thing to contribute to, but at the same time, it's creating an enormous energy demand. So one feels compelled to do something about that. And I guess one of the questions is, what is the forum for the debate that links all these things together? Because at the moment, it feels like there's a lot of lobbies.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of lobbying, and they're lobbying to, in certain instances, and I don't mean to be disparaging about it, but to the ill-informed. So there's a lack of information held centrally, or knowledge held centrally, and there's a lot of lobby groups that are being distorted by commercial interests. And somehow we need to diminish the power of the commercial interest lobby, and we need to increase the understanding centrally held, so that there can be a forum that allows exactly what Adrian said, for the competition between these parties to reduce, so that we can make a more, I won't say orderly transition towards a decarbonised future, because it is not less disorderly advance towards a decarbonised world and the elimination of fossil fuels.